Hi, and welcome to the latest Evaluate Vantage podcast, diving into the big upcoming catalysts in biopharma. I'm Jo Fagg, and I'm the content manager for the Vantage team. And today I'm joined by Jacob Leith, our senior reporter.
Hello.
We're sure you're familiar with Vantage, but if you're not, you can subscribe to our daily email alert so you'll receive our take on the latest news about pharma, biotech and medtech world using Evaluate Pharma's data to add further context. So first of all, I'm going to pass over to Jacob, who's going to go through a couple of imminent oncology readouts.
Yes, so a couple of big catalysts coming up for oncology. So firstly, TIGIT. So remember, this is the mechanism that was once thought to be hugely promising, but ultimately disappointed. There are actually three big TIGIT catalysts coming up, which could perhaps reinvigorate the space. So firstly, we've got overall survival data coming from Roche's Skyscraper-1 study. This is actually due imminently. I remember Skyscraper-1, so this is tiragolumab with Tecentriq. All these studies are in first-line lung cancer. And remember, this is the study that failed for progression-free survival. However, there is a hope that it could actually be positive for overall survival, depending on the statistical analysis plan. I mean, I think that's widely expected not to be positive, but if it is, and there is a chance that it will be positive, it could really prompt a reevaluation of this space. The other thing we're expecting, actually two studies slightly later on, probably around ASCO. The ARC-7 study, so this is Gilead Arcus's domvanalimab. Remember, this one read out positively recently for progression-free survival. However, this is sort of seen as being a technical success because the actual underlying data were a bit underwhelming. So we're going to get a second read of the progression-free survival, and then later on in the year, we're going to get the first overall survival data. And then finally, in TIGIT, we're going to have the first data from a large study of Merck's TIGITs. This is vibostolimab, probably also at ASCO. This is kind of a slightly strange lung cancer setting. It's a second-line setting. Might not be a huge success here, but it could inform the results of the later study, which will be in the first-line setting, and that will be later on in the year. So that's TIGIT. The other catalyst in cancer that could be quite big is for the TROP2 mechanism. And this is again, this is expected imminently. Readout of the TROPION-Lung1 study, and this is involving an antibody drug conjugate called datopotamab, and this is a Daiichi AstraZeneca partnered project. Now, the key thing about this is that it's going to be another test of the technology that lies behind Enhertu, which is a drug that's probably going to redefine breast cancer. But this obviously is not, it's targeting a different antigen, it's targeting TROP2, which is a fairly sort of underutilized strategy. It is the mechanism of Gilead's Trodelvy, which is sort of being seen as a very underwhelming drug in breast cancer. But for the Daiichi AstraZeneca asset, the setting again is lung. It's not breast, it's lung cancer. And if Astra and Daiichi can show something like a profile that's kind of Enhertu similar, this could turn out to be a huge project, another blockbuster, and that's why I think all eyes are on that, not only in this setting, but also in future settings. And it's not just a catalyst for this drug, but also for the whole platform on which Enhertu and datopotamab are based, and there are other sort of projects coming up behind that. Yes, so that again is coming up imminently.
So keeping on that theme of antibody drug conjugates, we've also got some data from one that's owned only by Daiichi at the moment. It's called patritumab. That actually targets HER2. We've got data from a registrational Athena Lung 01 study, and that is in metastatic or locally advanced EGFR mutated lung cancer. That's actually an open label study, and the primary endpoint is objective response rate. We've seen earlier data from that showed some impressive response rates, but there were issues with interstitial lung disease, which is a common toxicity with Enhertu. So yeah, we'll be looking for what kind of rates there are in that study. Elsewhere, we've got some data coming up on a subcutaneous formulation of Merck's Keytruda. What do you think about that, Jacob?
Yes, I think the whole subcutaneous setting for PD-1 inhibitors is going to be a huge theme this year. Keytruda, obviously, because this is a drug that, according to Evaluate, is probably going to sell about $34 billion in 2028, but which will, after 2028, start coming under pressure from biosimilars. And subcutaneous formulations are seen as a way of potentially prolonging this sort of generic exclusivity. Yes, so we have a phase 3 lung cancer study of subcutaneous Keytruda coming up. I think that's due quite soon. Interestingly enough, Merck isn't alone here, and possibly the first subcutaneous PD-1, PD-L1 drug to be approved could be Roche's Tecentriq. Now, Tecentriq read out positively in a study called IMSIN 001. So that was the first big success for subcutaneous Tecentriq. Roche subcutaneous subsequently filed it, and I'm not sure that really got much coverage. And Roche has actually just confirmed to me that filing has been accepted. So that's actually with regulators now. So that's actually an approval that could come before subcutaneous Keytruda. And the other PD-1 players are also in the subcutaneous space, but I think Roche and Merck are the sort of leading ones. And these events will be very important depending on how much sales will come under threat.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jacob. Now I'm going to move on to some upcoming data outside of Big Pharma. We've got some confirmatory data from Calliditas Tarpeyo, which is in IgA nephropathy. That is a kidney disorder that causes protein and blood to leak into the urine. Now, Tarpeyo is actually approved already on an accelerated pathway. That was on a surrogate proteinuria endpoint. And now we've got some confirmatory data on the EGFR endpoint, which is a measure of renal function. So we've got longer term data from part B of a study called NefIgArd. We have seen earlier hints of stabilization of that renal function endpoint, but this would be the longer term readout. It's quite a busy pipeline. IgAN, Travere has actually got a PDUFA in February. That project is called Sparsentan. Again, that is on an accelerated pathway, and its own EGFR data is coming later in the year. And also we've got data coming up from Chinook and Novartis. So lastly, I'm going to move on to NASH, and this is, we've talked about NASH several times on this podcast, and last time we were really looking for the Madrigal data. So we saw that data at the end of last year. They won on both their co-primary endpoints, which was NASH resolution and fibrosis improvement. We've got some earlier data coming up from some smaller companies, one called Viking and one called 89bio. Viking's VK2809 has a similar mechanism to Madrigal's project. They're both oral thyroid hormone receptor beta agonists, and that is a phase 2b Voyage study. Now, the primary endpoint there is only the change in liver fat content. We won't see those more important endpoints, the resolution and the fibrosis improvement, until much later in the year or even early next year. But for 89bio's project called pegozafermin, it's a different mechanism. It's an FGF21 analog. That is a phase 2b study called Enliven, and that actually has the co-primary endpoints of that resolution and fibrosis improvement. So we'll be looking out to see how that compares to Madrigal's data. And just recently, Intercept actually refiled, had its refiling accepted for its project, obeticholic acid. You probably remember that only met one of its endpoints, fibrosis endpoint, in phase 3, and actually had a complete response letter a couple of years ago. So there is a lot going on in NASH, and there will be this year and probably next year. So that is it from us. You can check out these catalysts and many more in the stories published on our website, which is evaluate.com/Vantage. So thanks for listening, and don't forget to sign up to our daily email alert.